I almost didn't go to my father's birthday. I stood in front of the mirror that evening, adjusting a collar that suddenly felt too tight. My stomach knotted with the same familiar dread I'd felt since childhood. Birthdays in our house were never about joy. They were about him. His pride, his temper, his need to be admired. Still, I told myself that this time would be different. I was older now, stronger. Maybe, just maybe, he would treat me like a human being. The house was already full when I arrived. Laughter spilled out through the open windows, mixed with loud music and the clinking of glasses. Relatives I hadn't seen in years greeted me politely, some with forced smiles, others with looks of pity they didn't bother to hide. Everyone was here to celebrate my father, the respected man, the successful provider, the perfect dad. I held the gift I'd carefully chosen, my palms sweating around the wrapped box. It wasn't expensive, but it was thoughtful. I wanted peace more than approval. My father stood at the center of the room, like a king on his throne. People surrounded him, praising his achievements, laughing at his jokes, hanging on every word. When his eyes finally landed on me, his smile twitched, not warm, not welcoming, but sharp. "So," he said loudly, making sure everyone heard, "you finally showed up." A few people chuckled. I forced a smile and handed him the gift. He barely glanced at it before setting it aside. Dinner began, and with it came the comments. They always did. Questions disguised as insults, jokes sharpened into blades, still wasting time on that useless career. He asked, sipping his drink. "Must be nice living without responsibility," he added, shaking his head. Each word landed like a small slap. I stayed quiet, staring at my plate, counting breaths. I reminded myself I was here to survive the night, not to fight. But he wouldn't stop. He compared me to others' cousins with better jobs, friends' children who were actually successful. The room grew awkwardly silent, yet no one interrupted him. No one ever did. Something inside me finally snapped when he laughed and said, "This is what happens when you raise someone too soft." I looked up. My heart pounded, but my voice came out steady. "Please don't talk about me like that." I said, "Not tonight." The room froze. His smile vanished. "What did you say?" he asked, standing. I said, "Don't humiliate me." I repeated, quieter now. "I came here to respect you." The next moment happened so fast it barely felt real. His hand came across my face with a loud crack. My head snapped to the side, pain exploding across my cheek. Gasps filled the room. Someone dropped a glass. My ears rang, and for a second, all I could taste was metal. I stared at him, stunned. "Don't ever talk back to me," he growled. Especially on my birthday, no one moved, no one spoke. My mother looked away. My relatives stared at the floor. The silence was louder than the slap. I felt heat rise to my eyes, but I refused to cry there. Slowly, I straightened up. My cheek burned, my chest ached, but something else stirred beneath the pain clarity. I didn't say a word. I picked up my coat, walked through the frozen room, and stepped outside into the cold night air. The door closed behind me, cutting off the laughter as if it had never existed. As I stood alone under the streetlight, trembling, one thought echoed in my mind. That slap wasn't just an act of anger. It was proof that I had spent my life protecting someone who never deserved my silence, and that this time I would not let it go unanswered. I didn't sleep that night. Every time I closed my eyes, I felt it again, the sharp crack of my father's hand, the sudden silence, the way everyone looked away as if I were the one who'd done something wrong. My cheek throbbed in rhythm with my heartbeat, a dull, angry pain that refused to fade. By morning, the skin was swollen and bruised, an ugly fingerprint blooming in purple and blue. I stared at my reflection for a long time. The bruise wasn't just on my face. It was in my chest, heavy and suffocating. I had spent years convincing myself that what happened behind closed doors didn't matter, that family loyalty meant endurance. Now, that lie felt unbearable. My phone buzzed constantly. Messages from relatives flooded in. But none of them said what I needed to hear. "He didn't mean it. You know how he is. Please don't make this a bigger issue. Not one apology." Not one question about how I was doing. 2 days later, a close friend stopped by unannounced. The moment they saw my face, their expression changed. They didn't ask me to explain. They didn't make excuses. They just said, "That's abuse." I laughed bitterly. "It's my father. That doesn't make it okay," they replied. Those words followed me for days. At work, I caught my reflection in a window and flinched. The bruise had faded slightly, but it was still visible. Strangers noticed. Colleagues asked gentle questions. I lied automatically. I walked into a door. Each lie tasted worse than the last. Meanwhile, my father was busy rewriting the story. I heard through relatives that I had disrespected him, that I'd embarrassed him in front of guests. According to him, the slap was discipline, deserved and justified. The familiar rage burned in my stomach, but beneath it was something new resolve. That night, I opened a box I'd kept hidden for years. Inside were old messages, journal pages, photos I'd taken secretly and forgotten, proof not just of one slap, but of a pattern. Threats, insults, control, fear. I realized with chilling clarity that this wasn't about a single moment of anger, it was about power. The next step terrified me. Walking into the police station felt like stepping off a cliff. My hands shook so badly I had to sit down. I almost turned around. I could still hear my father's voice in my head, telling me I was weak, ungrateful, nothing without him. But I stayed. I told the truth, all of it. Later, I met with a lawyer who listened quietly, taking notes, asking questions no one had ever asked me before. "Has this happened before?" "Yes." "Do you have evidence?" "Yes." "Are you willing to proceed?" That last question hung in the air. Proceeding meant war. It meant breaking the unspoken rule of our family, never challenge him. It meant risking rejection, gossip, and fear. But it also meant something else, freedom. That evening my father called. His voice was calm, almost friendly. "We can forget this happened," he said. "You're making a mistake." For the first time in my life, I didn't argue. I didn't apologize. I simply said no. The silence on the other end was thick, stunned. I hung up and exhaled slowly, feeling lighter than I had in years. The bruise on my face would heal, but the truth I'd finally spoken could not be erased. 2 weeks earlier, he had raised his hand to remind me of his power. Now the law would remind him of its own. The courtroom was colder than I expected, not just in temperature, but in feeling sterile, quiet, stripped of emotion. The kind of place where stories lost their drama and became facts. I sat on a hard wooden bench, my hands folded tightly in my lap, staring straight ahead. Every breath felt measured, controlled, as if one wrong move might shatter me. Then my father walked in. He didn't look worried. His suit was tailored, his posture confident, his chin lifted the way it always was when he believed he was untouchable. When his eyes found me, a familiar smirk tugged at his lips. It said everything. "You think you can beat me." I refused to look away. The judge entered, and suddenly the room snapped to attention. The proceedings began with dry legal language, dates, and case numbers, but underneath it all was something deeply personal. This was about a slap, yes, but it was also about years of fear disguised as respect. My father's lawyer spoke first. He painted a picture of a misunderstood parent, a difficult child, a single moment taken out of context. He emphasized my father's reputation, his success, his contributions to society. As he spoke, I felt the old doubt creeping in. What if they believe him? Then it was my turn. Walking to the witness stand felt like walking through water. Slow, heavy, unreal. I placed my hand on the Bible, swore to tell the truth, and sat down. My voice shook at first. I couldn't help it. But as I spoke, something steady took over. I described the birthday, the insults, the silence of the room. The slap. I didn't dramatize it. I didn't need to. The facts were enough. Then the questions turned deeper. Had this happened before? How long had the behavior gone on? I answered honestly. Each truth felt like pulling a thorn from my skin, painful but relieving. Evidence followed, photos, messages, medical documentation. Witness statements from friends who had seen the bruises, heard the threats, watched me shrink over the years. With each piece, the story my father had built began to crumble. When it was his turn to testify, he stood tall, confident, as if this were just another meeting he could dominate. He denied everything at first. Said I was exaggerating. Said I was emotional, ungrateful. But the judge asked questions he wasn't prepared for. Why were there messages threatening to teach me a lesson? Why did his story change about where he was standing? Why had he never denied the slap when first confronted? His answers became tangled. His voice sharpened. The mask slipped. At one point he raised his voice at the judge. Just slightly, just enough, the room went still. That moment said more than any document ever could. Power revealed itself when challenged. Family members were called to the stand. Some avoided my eyes. One finally admitted they had seen him hit me before. The truth, once spoken, seemed impossible to stop. By the end of the day, my father looked smaller, his shoulders slumped, his confidence leaked away, replaced by anger and disbelief. He kept glancing at me, as if searching for the child he once controlled. But that child wasn't there anymore. As the judge announced that a ruling would be delivered soon, my heart pounded. I didn't know what the outcome would be, but I knew something had already changed. For the first time in my life, my father was being judged. Not by fear, not by family silence, but by the truth. And the truth had finally found a voice. The courtroom was silent when the judge returned. No whispers, no shifting feet. Even the air felt heavy, as if everyone knew something irreversible was about to happen. I sat upright, my hands resting calmly in my lap, surprised by how steady I felt. 2 weeks earlier, my father's slap had left me shaking in the cold night. Now I was waiting for the law to speak. My father sat across the room, rigid and pale. The confidence he'd worn like armor was gone. In its place was a tight jaw and restless hands. For the first time, he looked unsure, like a man realizing that force and fear had limits. The judge began to read the ruling. Each word landed slowly, deliberately. The court acknowledged the assault. Not excused, not minimized, named. The judge spoke about abuse of power, about how authority inside a family does not grant the right to harm. I felt something loosen in my chest with every sentence. Then came the consequences. My father was found fully liable. The restraining order was granted. His professional license was suspended pending further review. Assets tied to unlawful activity were frozen, with formal investigations to follow. The judge's voice never rose, never softened. Justice didn't need emotion. A quiet gasp rippled through the room. My father's head snapped up. "This is ridiculous," he muttered, just loud enough to be heard. The judge looked at him once, firm, unimpressed, and continued. That single glance stripped away what little power he had left. When the gavel finally struck, the sound echoed through the courtroom like thunder. It was over. I didn't smile. I didn't cry. I simply closed my eyes and breathed. The victory wasn't loud or dramatic. It was clean, final. As people began to stand, I noticed my father remained seated. No one rushed to him. No hand touched his shoulder. The man who had once commanded silence with a raised voice now sat alone. Surrounded by consequences he could no longer intimidate away. Outside, the sun was brighter than I remembered. The air felt lighter, sharper. I stepped down the courthouse stairs, each step carrying me farther from the person I used to be. The one who stayed quiet to keep the peace, who believed survival meant submission. A reporter called out my name, asking how I felt. I paused, choosing my words carefully. "Free," I said. In the days that followed, the truth continued to ripple outward. Family members who had once stayed silent now avoided me, not out of anger, but shame. Others reached out quietly, apologizing for not protecting me. I accepted some apologies. I didn't need all of them. My father tried to call once. I didn't answer. There was nothing left to say. The law had spoken where words never could. I moved forward. New apartment, new routines, new boundaries. Therapy helped. So did the simple act of waking up without fear. Healing wasn't instant, but it was real. Sometimes I thought about that night, his birthday, the slap, the stunned silence. He had raised his hand to remind me of his control. Instead, he handed me the moment that ended it. I didn't take revenge, I took my life back, and that was something no judge could ever give him.